Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to your Lunch Break Live. My name is Ivana Harinkyu if you're new here, and if you're not, thank you for coming back. Today is Wednesday, September the 7th, and today we're going to update you on a story we first reported on last month, and that is a story about how Alabama overpaid about $164 million in unemployment benefits during the years 2020 and 2021, and how the state came back and started asking people to pay back some of that money. Our own Sarah Whites-Koditschek reported that story, and she is here today to update us on what is happening with the unemployment kind of saga in Alabama. Again, these people who are being asked to pay back thousands of dollars and what the latest is. Now, Sarah, you have some reporting from the other day. We're going to link here, and we're going to talk about that in a little more detail. But first, catch us up with the way the news cycle goes. I know a lot of people forget things that happened a month ago or so if they weren't personally affected by it, if they didn't personally get one of these calls or letters. So give me a quick update on what happened last month, and then we'll get into what the latest is.
Sure. So last month, we wrote a story about these notices going out. They went out starting in 2021 to people saying who got unemployment during the pandemic, saying you owe this money back or a portion back. And for a lot of people, it was thousands of dollars, like $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. I was actually on the phone with one woman that I interviewed for the story, and she was looking at her account. She thought it was like under $2,000 as we were talking, and then it had updated to $20,000. She was really upset. So the state is asking for the money back, and people were getting these notices saying like, we'll take it out of your tax returns, or we may garnish your wages. And totally unexpected. And the backstory to that is that about a quarter of Americans got some kind of unemployment during the pandemic, and the state was not set up for this massive relief effort. And so there were a lot of issues with applications, unclear exactly from which source, but it could have been like an error. Somebody wrote like the wrong detail on a form, or the agency could have made a mistake, and then it would be flagged as an overpayment. So when we wrote the story, the governor actually responded and said, people should not have to pay for the government's mistakes. At the end of the day, the state paid them the money regardless of whose fault it was. And then to further complicate the situation, Alabama was like an average of like 2 years behind on going through appeals, both from people who applied for unemployment and never heard back, and many people just could never get through in the first place, and also from the people who got the overpayments. They wanted to appeal that, but nobody could, or not nobody, but most people could not get through. There were like upwards of like 70,000 appeals that the department had just sitting around. They couldn't get through in the end of 2021. So that really made things worse, because not only was this problem with the system, but then it wasn't getting resolved.
And I remember the kind of catch-22 that you and I talked about when you first reported this last month was that the appeals process, again, it was over 500-day wait. So it was about a 2-year wait on this appeals process. Now, the catch there is if you are going to appeal, say, your $20,000 debt that the state is saying you owe because of this overpayment, if you went the route of appealing it, you could risk having your wages garnished because you're not making those overpayments. And the appeal process, again, is a multi-year wait. You don't know what's going to happen in that period. Now, the other side of it, if you don't have the money to pay it, if you are barely getting by as it is, you start trying to pay it, then if you would have gone through the appeals process, who knows, you could have gotten some of it waived. So there was no easy way out and no good way out of the situation. And I do remember when the governor responded to your reporting, the governor called the whole situation outrageous. And she seemed kind of surprised at a lot of the things that you had reported, and said that it was unacceptable and that people should not be required or even asked to pay back the government's mistakes. Now, you mentioned there was some question at the time. Were these overpayments a result of issues on the Alabama Department of Labor, like computer issues, staffing issues, things of that nature, or issues with people filling out that unemployment paperwork, which was not easy? If I know a lot of us remember, that was a lot of paperwork, a lot of application questions there, and people could have easily misunderstood that and maybe put in something wrong and then been flagged, as you said, for getting an overpayment. That's where we were. So let's fast forward now to where we are today. And now your reporting shows the Department of Labor is saying some people, they're not giving a great number, but some people could get a waiver for a portion of their debt.
Right. So I checked back in to see, it's been about a month. What have they decided to do? And they said so far they've sent out about 8,000 notices to people. They haven't told us how many people in total have gotten an overpayment notice, and we've asked several times, but we're still hoping to find that number. But over $150 million. So we don't know how many people, but 8,000 people got a letter saying you may be eligible to appeal to have a portion of your overpayment waived. And the portion is like this one pandemic program that happened sort of later in the pandemic and paid people about $300 a week. Earlier, it was about $600 a week in addition to the state money. So one of the multiple programs that were put together to make up the unemployment. And so the state could apply for a waiver to offer blanket forgiveness. Other states have done this. Alabama says it's looking into it, but it's not sure if it can identify the instances where this happened clearly enough to fit the requirements. Other states have done it. Alabama is still figuring out if has the technological capability to identify the issues clearly enough to actually give people forgiveness, is where we're at right now.
Which is just very frustrating to hear, Sarah. If you are a person who, again, is in debt, thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars to the state, and then the state says, well, maybe you'll get a waiver. And even some of these waivers, if a person receives a waiver, they say it could only be for a portion of that money. So tell me about that. Is that essentially taking maybe a $20,000 debt down to a $10,000 debt?
Possibly, yeah. And some of these are cases where they've clearly identified of the situations they've had a chance to go through. Oh, this was a state error. Like they've clearly identified a state error in one of the multiple programs, a portion of your payments that you received. So you don't owe those part. It might be like you don't owe 6 of your $20,000 or whatever. And the legal services, that advocacy group that sued the state over this whole situation and has been really vocal and active with it. Spoke with someone there, and he said, that his worry was that this could confuse people who want to appeal. They're gonna have a hard time possibly figuring out what this means, and then if they have to appeal once, and then if the state does seek broader waivers, then there's like another appeal for another part of their money, and it's hard to get resources or to get through to get explanations. So that is a potential downside to this approach.
Well, and it also seems like nobody really has clear answers on what people should do that are affected. As you said, this appeals process seems completely bungled. And it's also, or at least it was for a while, nearly impossible to get anybody on the phone at the Department of Labor to try to talk to them. And now, because this situation is so nuanced and there's so many variables here, and especially as we said, a lot of these cases, the department doesn't know if it was their error or a user error. So what are people supposed to do who are affected? Are they supposed to reach out to the Department of Labor, or is there another system or another department that can help them?
Yeah, when you get an overpayment, it's actually not final until you've had a chance to appeal. Oddly, the state was threatening, to take the money back, and has put some people into a program to seize their tax returns already. And they say that's only when they've clarified that it was a fraudulent, but still everybody got told that they would have their tax returns seized. So um, yeah, so everyone is supposed to have the chance to appeal, and it's not resolved until they can appeal, but there are time limits to appeal. So it's like there's a 30-day appeal or whatever, depending on, the point in the process. Um, but they can't get their appeal resolved within the time frame. So um, I can't tell you whether the department is going to say like this is not final until everybody has had a chance to appeal, but that's something I can ask them.
Well, and what about people who, again, the department can't clearly say why the overpayment happened, whether it was a user error or whether it was their error? What happens to those people?
I think that's what the appeal is meant to resolve, but that's as of right now, that is what, the question of like, are they going to seek a waiver? They're saying we're not sure we can. So I guess implicitly that means that those people would still owe that money. Um, and you're talking about the issues with people getting through. We reported on some reports that the department sent to the federal department last year, and they laid out like they had all these computer issues, and they had a lot of created a lot of delays and a lot of problems in their system during the pandemic, and they also had laid off staff right before the pandemic because of budget cuts. So they had less staff, and they had a new computer system they were trying to implement. They were putting it in place, and then the pandemic happened. This is what they said, and that is why they were so delayed. And Alabama was, with as far as the appeals, Alabama was, you mentioned, almost 2 years behind on average. The second slowest state, Georgia, was 1 year behind on average, but we had states like Utah that were 2 weeks behind. So there's this huge variability in how states functioned during this time.
Well, and again, I think that you make a good point there, saying the Department of Labor has already acknowledged that they had their own problems, staffing, computers, phones. They had all kinds of issues there. So they've kind of already accepted responsibility for part of it. Now it's, I would assume, trying to go through these thousands of people and see who went with what mistake or what mistake caused who their pain. And that seems very, very frustrating for people. Now, again, I know the governor said last month about your reporting that it was outrageous. She also said that people should not have to pay back the government's mistake if these things were a mistake on the Department of Labor. Have we heard anything else from Governor Ivey?
No, I reached out last week, and they said that they referred me back to the department at this point. And like I said, the department, you're talking about the mistakes, whose fault were they? I would assume, when they're saying we're not sure we can target and identify the cause of these problems enough to meet the federal requirements. I think that, yeah, that makes me wonder, like, well, does that mean you can't sort out why that happened, or how possible is it to do that if they're not sure if they can do it for the sake of, maybe giving waivers? I'm not sure that we have those details.
And how do you go after somebody for tens of thousands of dollars if you're not sure that it's their fault that they were overpaid?
Yeah, so like in normal times, this does happen. Like if people are overpaid for whatever reason, it could be like they filled out the form wrong and they got some money that they actually weren't qualified for, or it could be an agency error. Maybe the employer gave some false, mistaken information. The state does like routinely collect that money back, and historically has not very often, if ever, given appeals for it. But the circumstance of like the pandemic crisis and just the volume of money, it's just on a totally different scale right now.
$164 million, and we don't have a firm number on the amount of people that affects. Sarah, that is a wild story. I know one that people have been interested in since you first reported it last week, and that people are looking forward to updates on. So thank you for your reporting. Thank you for your updates here. We're going to leave your latest story and links here, and we'll definitely have to have you back once you get a little bit more of an update on what is happening and what the next step is.
Great. I look forward to that.
Thank you, Sarah. Everybody watching, thank you so much. Again, we're going to leave that link here, and we'll leave some links to Sarah's previous reporting on the situation as well. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow.